This podcast is a quest for well-being, a quest for a meaningful life through the exploration of fundamental truth. Enlightening ideas, insights on physical, mental, and spiritual health. The inspiration is love. The aspiration is to awaken new ways of thinking that can lead us to a new way of being well. Welcome to Body, Mind, and Soul Healing Conversations.
Neurodiversity is an essential form of human diversity. The idea that there is one normal or healthy type of brain or mind, or one right style of neurocognitive functioning, is no more valid than the idea that there is one normal or right gender, race, or culture. The classification of neurodivergence, e.g. autism, ADHD, dyslexia, bipolarity, as a medical psychiatric pathology has no valid scientific basis, and instead reflects cultural prejudice and oppresses those labeled as such. The social dynamics around neurodiversity are similar to the dynamics that manifest around other forms of human diversity. These dynamics include unequal distribution of social power. Conversely, when embraced, diversity can act as a source of creative potential. Psychotherapists who integrate the neurodiversity paradigm into their work do so by refusing to label neurodivergence as intrinsically pathological. Instead of attempting to cure autistic or bipolar clients, for instance, these therapists seek to help autistic or bipolar people thrive as autistic or bipolar people, finding ways of living that are more in harmony with their natural neurological dispositions, and helping them to heal from internalized oppression, says Nick Walker. Valeria Tellez interviews Angelica Weeks, aka Angela. She is a 33-year-old mental health clinician who has been working in the field for almost 3 years now. She is a private practicing psychotherapist, and she also works part-time for a local community college, Edmonds College, as an associate faculty for the Family Life Education Department, FLED. Angela is also a mother to 3 children. She is also very open about having attention deficit hyperactivity disorder with combined presentation, and that herself and her family are also neurodiverse. Angela's 3 children are all autistic. It is highly suspected that her husband is autistic as well. Angela openly shares this information with her clients, as this tends to help them feel more at ease to experience representation and to feel understood. She works primarily with those who identify as neurodiverse and trauma survivors. Angela has also worked with a variety of age groups, from 4 up to 65-year-olds. Presently, she has children, adolescents, and adults on her caseload. She enjoys drawing and coloring, reading, playing with her children, going on adventures and exploring the area she lives in, shopping, baking, and spending time with friends and family. Meet Angela at angelica-weeks.clientsecure.me. Here's the interview with Angela Weeks.
In your own words, who is Angela Weeks?
I would say that Angela Weeks is like a person who wears many hats. Yeah, I would say I am a mother and a wife, a friend, a sister, and also like within my role and as in my career, I would also say consider myself a therapist.
That's beautiful. And I wanted to ask you about the inspiration to become a therapist. How did you become a neurodiverse therapist?
I love that question. So I think for me, it started, just throughout my childhood experiences. I actually experienced trauma when I was younger. And so I had a lot of great, help and aids and protective factors, people in my life that helped me. But, there was still some things that I struggled with. And as I got older, I realized a lot of it was, part of my ability to organize and my ability to, interact with people in a certain way. And I still got along, but it just felt different. And so that's like there in the back of my mind, like still kind of struggling a bit with some of the social aspects, and then still succeeding though academically with the help I had. And so I went into social work for my bachelor's, really enjoyed the experience working with youth. From there, moved on to eventually my master's in school counseling. And so actually in that experience, I did a school counseling internship, and I love working with kids, but I realized I really struggled to manage all the different tasks, and I just couldn't get a grasp. And so during my graduate school time, I went to go get assessed for ADHD, and I received that diagnosis of, ADHD, for those who may not know, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And I was diagnosed with combined presentation, which means I show both hyperactive tendencies and inattentive. And it just made way more sense. Yeah, and so from there, I decided I still want to work with kids. My master's degree actually allowed me to apply for my license in mental health counseling because I took all the same courses as my other colleagues in that field. And so this actually led me to a clinic called Beautiful Autism, where I started meeting with a lot of people who are neurodiverse, identify as neurodiverse. And I found myself also being able to relate to this population, people who are autistic, ADHD. And so, yeah. And then as I moved on to my private practice, I continued to, present myself as a neurodiverse therapist. And it seems to work because we all kind of get attracted to each other.
That's wonderful to know. I love communities and this idea that we can come together with this shared goal to help one another in a sense of finding ways to integrate ourselves naturally to our what do you call it? I would say there's something that I read today that's called, let me see here, it's called Neurological Dispositions. So because we are so different, the idea is to find a way to live in harmony with our natural neurological dispositions. That's what I learned today by reading more about neurodiversity. It was not familiar to me. And then it made so much sense because that's the way I navigate this reality as well. Kind of have found ways to be in balance with what is here already. So we can resist to fight what is, and that causes so much more problems. I'll be asking you more questions about neurodiversity in a moment, Angela. Before that, I have another open question for you. How do you define mental health? The question really is, what is to be mentally healthy? What does it mean to have a normal brain?
I would say mental health, that's so broad, and I have no problem defining it because I think mental and medical, they both enmesh. But yeah, if I were just to focus on mental health, I would say I think it's just the ability to observe and also experience one's functioning in society throughout time, and just being able to cope and being able to survive and thrive and live ultimately. And so mental health, I think, is that ability to do so. And so on the offset of that would be when we need treatment for mental health because our ability to function, thrive, survive, continue moving forward might be halted or might be impaired a bit.
That's also natural, isn't it? To ask for support or to look for support. I love this natural aspect of life. Anything that inspires nature, natural, it calls my attention. So another open question is about the purpose of the human experience. What do you think that is?
I would say, I think it's unique to everyone, but I personally know that, we all come from different backgrounds, and this can lead to, our perspectives and to an extent bias. But what I would say is I kind of align with you as well, that aspect of community in that human experience. I think community is a huge part of that. We need people to survive, as you said, too, to be able to ask for help. It's a natural thing. We grow up with it. We need it, since the moment of conception. So it's just something, I think part of the human experience is that need of community and to be able to survive in that way.
What is your idea of balance, Angela? What is to live this balanced life? Do you have a description for that, per se?
Yeah, I would say balance is a combination of being able to serve both your like interpersonal and intrapersonal. And so I'll say interpersonal are those that are around you. We can say community. And intrapersonal is yourself, your personal experiences. So I think a good balance is being able to serve both so that way you don't, end up in isolation. But at the same time, you do take the time to serve yourself as well. And I think there's a balance in both. I'll also add, actually, when I write up my treatment goals for my clients, I will include both inter and intrapersonal, like increase in both areas for my clients to know their boundaries in both of them to be able to serve both areas.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. I haven't heard this way, but makes so much sense again, right? Balancing the way we interact with the world, ourselves and others, right? Bringing them together. I love this holistic way of living. It's very attractive to me as well.
Oh, thank you.
With that in mind, do you have any spiritual practices?
I would say at this time, I don't know about spiritual practices. I could go on a tangent on my upbringing, but I would say that I do believe in some spiritual aspect, like for yourself, like kind of going beyond just like the tangible and going into more of like, I guess like the metaphysical or really like what you are experiencing, meditation, being able to just like take the time to like almost feel like time is halted and just experience the world that's disconnected, I guess, from reality to an extent and just really like think of things in a different way, very conceptual thinking.
So what is healing to you and what are some of the obstacles to healing, Angela?
With healing is that, like, for example, when you go to see a doctor or you go for a medical or physical, healing, you have to like assess what's going on and then at the same time also give it appropriate recovery, like to such injuries, right? Because not all of the injuries or all of the reasons why you would go see someone for physical help will be the same. And so I'll say for the same thing with mental health, it's assessing what the need is and ultimately, working on that recovery. And I would also add too that no matter the pace, it's just good to know that you're moving forward. And I also like to think of it too as noticing your healing would be like you noticing your own progress. I shouldn't, as a therapist, I really don't like to say like, oh, I can tell you're doing better. I want my clients to be able to identify that. I might ask them, but I think ultimate healing is something where you need to identify it, just like your body physically, you can identify that, you are doing better and you are feeling better.
I love that idea that we can become more aware in every way, physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally. Yeah, that's a beautiful way of navigating this reality. And sometimes I wonder if there is a destination for these things. It seems like we are always healing, right, Angela? Physically, we are getting hurt or the body's not doing so well one day, or it varies from moment to moment. That's what I notice. Even with mental health, emotional health, it never stays the same. Do you get this feeling too, or you get to experience this?
I will say two things. One, to also answer the other question about obstacles to healing, and then two, about that it's not the same. Like it kind of changes. So I think they kind of are intertwined. But I will say like obstacles to healing, I think can be when we do experience that lack of community that is for us. And not being able to gauge our own healing, which is why, like I said before, I, with my clients, I don't want to be the person to tell them that I think they're doing better, because then they'll rely on others and it'll be hard to know if, they truly are progressing that works for them, because you'll still kind of feel that like off gut feeling something's not right.
Or the opposite can happen too, where you're told otherwise, that you actually are not doing well when really you are. Yeah, so I would say that. And so with things changing, often with even just physical, mental, social, emotional health, that's why I really believe it's good that we can kind of notice our own progress, so that when there are changes, we can be sensitive to them. And then just, be able to work on it, or be able to just pay attention to it and do what we need to help. But, it's normal. It's part of life.
Another question that came to me is about the connectivity between physical health, emotional, mental, spiritual, and social. Are they all influencing one another all the time? Do you also see them, these elements of life, of the human experience, in a way all connected?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah. And there's actually a type of therapy called somatization, which involves, the body's expression of basically our emotions. Yeah, I like to take, to an extent, a psychoeducational approach with my clients, especially those who have experienced trauma, that trauma-informed care. And so, yeah, I'll let them know about their body, and, talk more also about why they might be experiencing some of these symptoms. Some common ones are, having a stomach ache, for example, but other ones that some people may not realize either are some of that like constant tension in your body that happens. And because of that constant tension and inability to relax, your muscles are, they're achy. And I've had clients who've had like back pain, and I've had clients who've experienced, like headaches often. And then I also like to think about the fight, flight, freeze mode, when we just want to protect ourselves, that reptilian brain. And I have clients who have told me before they're not sure why they're like, they feel like they're gained like water weight all of a sudden, or why they feel like they are just like having stomach issues, gastrointestinal issues. And so as we talk about that too, that's again that fight, flight, freeze mode of your body getting ready to just protect itself ultimately. Yeah, so we go into those things too.
I love this approach of connecting all aspects of the human experience, because it's a challenge to separate them, to see human beings as, let's say, parts. It's almost like only focusing on the parts and not life as a whole. I guess that's why I love the idea of some spiritual teachings, that life is all about wholeness. It works as a whole. All parts work together to realize the whole, which is what we see, life itself, the way it's happening. So it's fascinating, this idea.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I agree too. Compartmentalizing yourself is just, it's not really going to help solve the problem or help solve the presenting problem or the struggle, because they do intertwine. And you can say the same thing for medical health. If you are experiencing some medical health, oftentimes you might experience mental health that might be impacted too from that.
I would love now to talk to you more specifically about neurodiversity. So the first question is a fundamental one. How do you describe what neurodiversity is?
Yeah, so neurodiversity ultimately is a person's brain development that diverges or is diverse compared to what is the majority of society. So I would say that there are, differences in that development. And this could be things as different as, when someone talks, when they first begin to speak, versus when someone, first kind of acknowledges or understands certain concepts. So for example, a lot of autistics, as they develop, can grasp more concrete things like shapes and numbers and colors so much more quickly than I would say are neurotypical. So that's the opposite of neurodiverse, but neurotypical, individuals.
So it's just a difference. It's just neurodivergent people. They're just wired differently, neurologically. That's what it is, right, Angela? who would be considered neurodiverse? You just mentioned autistic people, but then they are different kinds, other kinds, right? With different labels, I would say.
It's a lot, but I would say, yeah, autistics, those who are ADHD. This would also include those who have like learning disabilities, learning differences, right? So dyslexia, dyscalculia, and such. In addition to that, you can also think about those who are who have a diagnosis also of like bipolar disorders as well. And then some OCD, as a lot of these like disorders, these presentations are also comorbid. They get diagnosed oftentimes, sometimes together too, And so, yeah, I know there's a few more, but I don't want to say all of them just in case I'm like forgetting anyone in particular or forget accidentally one.
And another question that comes to me is about this idea of labeling, defining what is different and what is disabled when it comes to the brain functions and all that. Do you make this distinction too, Angela, or you just see everything is different? Every brain is different.
Yeah. So I think when it comes to the label of disabled, I will say that I think everyone is going to have a different perspective on it. And I think everyone who wants to like identify, if they are neurodiverse, for example, as we were talking about this, it depends how they want to identify themselves. Because I know there are people out there who might be labeled with a disability, but may not identify as having a disability. And then I know people who actually are autistic, for example, who do say, yes, I do have a disability. As a therapist, I don't distinguish or label anyone necessarily as disabled. My main focus is, as you said, the differences. I just want to focus more on the differences. Like for me, it's how do you process information? How do you receive information? I like to also do sensory profiles for pretty much all of my clients. You can be neurodiverse or neurotypical. It's just really good to see how you interact in your environment and how much input, affects you, or how understimulated are you by the environment.
So that's a beautiful approach. And I love that, Angela. Thank you for doing what you do. Focusing on a way of integrating our inner world into the external world in a natural way. I mean, that's what is to be natural anyway. So, and unfortunately, it's not as easy, right, as we think it is. Mm-hmm. Trying to bring our inner world, I call it. I know you call it from a scientific point of view, neurological dispositions and differences. In my view, I just see as bringing what is already here to the outside and expressing what is natural to us, to others, in a way that they also perceive as natural. And sometimes it doesn't happen, but it's, that's not up to us, is it? To change the way most people think. Which it's wonderful. And I have seen so many of us, like a lot of the guests that I interview here, doing exactly that, changing some paradigms, not just in the scientific field, but in all of them, the health and the spiritual ways of seeing life. So that integration too between spirituality and science. So it has been a wonderful experience to witness that.
Yeah, definitely.
Would you like to add anything, to make any comments, Angela, about the how society views at this point, to this day, differences when it comes to neurodiversity? Do you have some comments to make?
Yeah, if anything, I would say, well, one, I live in Washington State, so I know we are a quote-unquote techie state, and I know we draw in a lot of autistic populations. So I know here in our state, autistic populations are pretty high, and so I think there's been more integration, at least in the western part of the state. Seattle, Bellevue, main cities. So there's been a lot of integration of autism and understanding it more. There's a lot of resources and a lot of programs and a lot of specialized schools over here, that even identify themselves as a neurodiverse school, or we'll say like we accept neurodiverse students. So the terminology, at least here in the western part of the state, I see As for outside of this state, I think in general, I think it's hard to determine. I think it is something that is emerging more, that I've seen emerge more with technology and being able to like access more information on it. I think it's always going to be something to advocate for when I think life is experienced as a minority. And so I think it's just continuing to live life and continuing to allow this emergence of neurodiversity to become more apparent and more known, as time goes by.
Another question I have about neurodiversity is this definition again by societies that being autistic, for example, is a disorder. So it's still classified as a disorder. Is that for insurance reasons? Do you know anything about it?
So I think it's for insurance purposes. I know, and I can't speak for the autistic community necessarily, but what I can say are things that I've read from the autistic community, and also having, I don't think I shared this actually before, but also having like 3 autistic children myself. Yeah, I would say that I think the resources are definitely beneficial from the actual diagnosis. I think when you think about the word disorder, I mean, really it goes into the idea of something that just has a dissonance, or something that just doesn't allow for order to be managed, for yourself to be managed. And I think being born into a society where a lot of mainstream developmental norms are just not the same for autistics, I think it does create, unfortunately, an environment where resources have to be sought out. So I would say that, yes, a disorder in that there is a need for resources and to understand and be educated and learn more about, for example, autism or even ADHD. But at the same time, I think if there is a time in the future where it becomes mainstream developmental, information about neurodiverse development, I don't know if it would still be disorder as much as just finding resources to help your child. But, it could be, because I know, again, it's a spectrum and there are a lot of different people, different experiences. But I always go back to the resources. What are the resources in the community allow this person to thrive and really experience it as a disorder or not?
Or not, right, Angela? Yeah, that's another clear answer, and beautiful to hear that the community working together with what we have, what they have. So that's really beautiful to know. Another question that came to me is about treatments. So I know that being neurodivergent, it's not a disorder, so it's not something that you're looking for the cure. So talk to me for a moment about not the treatment. I would say finding the ways to, how can I put this? The ways to explore more the needs, right, of a neurodivergent so they can adapt better to society in a way, but not even that, just to be happy, just to thrive as a human being.
Yeah, definitely. And as every individual is different, I would say, neurotypical or neurodiverse be the same thing. Everyone's needs are going to be different. But I would say, at least for myself as a therapist who works with, a lot of neurodiverse clients, I would say, again, one of my things is sensory profile is what I really like, trying to get an understanding, and my clients as well get an understanding of like how they experience their environment. If they're understimulated, and then that might make sense for some of their behaviors or some of their interests, and then what might overstimulate them, which then also might, explain some of their behaviors and interests as well. Yeah, the second thing that I like to do as well is to provide my neurodiverse clients like neurotypical development, and not because I want them to follow that, but because I want them to know that there are differences, as much as often like neurotypical parents or neurotypical people may get to learn about neurodiverse development. I like to flip it
Yeah.
and my neurodiverse clients, neurotypical development. And as someone who is not neurotypical, I think it gets received, in a way that makes sense, because I'll say like we or I don't understand this either, but I do know that this is how things, happen, or how they develop in this way. And so I think it's nice to have something tangible, and then to know that there are similar experiences. It's just different. And a good example of this is rigidity. For example, autistics might be, for example, told that they can be really rigid. And I'll say, well, neurotypicals are very rigid too.
Yes.
Big on binary things, we're black and white in a more generalized way. A lot of neurotypicals are generally black and white rigid in a generalized manner. And so on a one-on-one basis, it doesn't look like rigidity. But if you take a step back, a really big step back, and look at our society, generally, it is very black and white.
I love the way you do the flip, right? Which has everything to do with education. You call it psychoeducation. I never heard it that way, this term.
Oh, yeah.
That makes sense too. And then I have one more question about the misconceptions about neurodiverse individuals. Mm-hmm. We have heard about some of them being geniuses. I think you call us savant. I'm not sure how to pronounce that.
Savant syndrome.
Savant, yeah. So talk to me about the misconceptions. I would love to hear more about it.
Oh, yeah. I will say perhaps I've had clients who may or would be diagnosed with savant syndrome, but perhaps have not received that diagnosis. But I would say that, yeah, again, like I was saying before, with development from the beginning of life, like I had shared before, that, when it comes to those who are neurodiverse, the things that tend to get focused on or developed are different than what neurotypicals would. So what may appear to be social development much more quickly, or at least focused on the other hand, too, the development of grasping concepts for a lot of neurodiverse individuals might come first, then the social, while it could be flipped with neurotypicals, where there's the more social aspect and then concepts get developed later. So and so I would say, though, that either way, I think anyone can be, of course, a genius. I think, though, with autistics, though, it's just the focus, and I think different development, what neurodiverse people will ultimately focus on is going to be different than the norm. So it's going to look so much more, it's just going to look so much more different. But I think it is amazing. I think it's a hard thing for me a little bit to kind of explain as well, because I feel like I can talk a whole hour about that.
Yes, I can imagine.
But I'll give an example of myself, though. I have a very high IQ, especially in verbal comprehension. So I see patterns often in people's rhetoric, behaviors, and I can make connections very, very, very fast. And so this brings me to a high intellect. And so there's ups and downs to it. It's not a bad thing, but I do appreciate it. But it's something that I personally have realized that not a lot of people are as fast as my brain is to be able to comprehend and make conclusions to things very quickly about what people say and do. And so when you bring up the, about the misconception or conception of autistics or people who are neurodiverse and possibly genius, I would say that there's, again, the ups and downs of what that means. So I think it's not as black and white.
I love how you keep going back to this idea of not being black and white, that we are all unique, that it's just different. I love that message, Angela. Thank you. What is success to you these days? What is to be successful to you?
Yeah, I would say, again, I think I've kind of said for some of the questions asked, but answered in a similar way, that I think it's going to look different for everyone. But I think success is going to be something ultimately going back to that balance. I think you talked about too, that balance between interpersonal and intrapersonal experiences in a positive way, right? I think that is what success can look like. And so again, that'll look different for everyone. whether neurodiverse or neurotypical, different cultures, whether collectivist or, individualistic cultures. But I think that balance that fits for you. And so for someone who's, for example, autistic, maybe interpersonal, that connection with others, as I talk with a lot of clients, their bucket gets filled very quickly compared to who are neurotypical, but they still want that connection, of course. So it may not be as balanced, maybe, a little less what people might consider social interactions, but, a lot more time for themselves. But for someone like me, I really am extroverted and love spending time with people. So I think time with others is much more higher, and time for myself is a little bit less in comparison, but that's the balance for me. But that may not fit for someone else.
Beautiful answer, Angela. The balance, going back to balance. Success means balance, right? Yeah, we see that in nature, right? Nature seems to be very balanced when you look at it. Another question that I have, the ending questions, is it's a fun one from my perspective. What do you love most about being in a human body?
About being in a human body. Oh, I like that. Very conceptual. Yeah, I would say I think what I enjoy most is kind of like the view. I think I really enjoy being able to engage and interact in my environment with that human experience, and not just engage and interact alone, not just moving through things, right? But knowing that I make an impact, knowing that every step I take, every word I say, everything I do, there is going to be some sort of impact. Nothing will be the same with my presence and with everyone's presence, right? People who stop their car at that stoplight, right? There's another car behind them. That's going to make a change, and it's going to be an impact. It may not be a big impact, but I think the human experience, we really do impact one another, whether very minimally or very severely. And it's just a constant system and community of functioning.
And another question is, what is another word for freedom?
I like that. I'll have to think about that for a moment. Another word for freedom, because again, I think there will be perspectives, but I think another word for freedom could be, and this goes back to, again, I think there's a pattern here, but it goes back to that balance. I think freedom might look like that balance and feeling in control of being able to balance out your life, or feeling as if you do have the majority of that control, which is what I actually work on with a lot of my clients, what you can and cannot control, and so I think freedom is being able to get to that place to realize and understand your balance. I do want to be sensitive and say that I do understand that there are things out there, in our society that unfortunately do have a heavy impact on people's ability to be able to experience, I think, freedom in other ways as well. So again, I do want to be sensitive to that and not overlook how certain systems can negatively impact others. But I do go back again to that balance because I think in the end, when you can find it wherever you are, at least, I think that control is really hopeful to be able to see and know what you do have in your hands, at least at that time.
And my last question is, what 3 experiences you wish everyone to have before they lose the body, before they die?
I like the existential questions you asked too. So 3. Okay, I gotta think. 2 for a moment. I would say 1 is being able to experience life with others. And when I say with others, I mean intentionally taking the time to share and engage in experiences together, right? Whether it's taking that time to just, experience life with a friend and being able to know that you can rely on them and you can both have that same empathy, connection, experience, togetherness, right? It can be in a romantic relationship. It can be with your children. But, I would say that intentionality of doing that. Second thing I would say is also experiencing life in and of itself with just yourself, right? Being able to experience life at times on your own. And this could be going on a walk. This could be taking the time to read a book. This could be also sitting in nature or just doing something that's just the only intention is just for you. I would say that would be good too. Again, that balance. And then I would say the third thing too would be to be able to understand your value and understand your worth in life. Going back to that, we impact our world no matter what we do. Everything is going to have an impact. And so I think being able to find that value and worth you have, I think is going to allow you to be able to do the first two.
Yeah. Yes, I love your wisdom and your clarity, Angela. Thank you so much for sharing you with the world, with us. I want to thank you again. Yeah, thank you for your presence here today, for the work you do, for your intention and everything that you represent. Thank you so much. And before we say goodbye, where can we find more information about you, your work, services, and future projects?
I know I have started my private practice about 8 months ago, so I'm still setting some things up, but I can be found on Psychology Today if you look up Angela Weeks. And so and from there I have my website link is there as well. And then my work history is there as well. As for projects, I'm actually starting, it's going to be next year, the start of next year, because it's a little bit of a slow burn with getting this started, but I'm wanting to do some research on development of neurodiverse children. And so I'm just going to be, I'm making connections with local schools and local developmental preschools and just taking that time. So it's coming, but it's gonna take some time before I really put it out there even more.
And I'll have the website available on your podcast profile. So listeners and readers, they'll just click on the link. Thank you so much again for your presence, and we'll talk soon, Angela. Bye for now.
Yeah, thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for listening. To learn more about Angela Weeks and her work, please visit angelica-weeks.clientsecure.me.
To learn more about this podcast, please visit fitforjoy.org/podcast. Thank you again for listening, and bye for now.